and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, Russia seeks to mend fences with neighbors and a friendlier Trump administration, but shows no signs of budging over Crimea and Syria. And Donald Trump is appointing economic professor Peter Navarro to head a new trade council. Will Mr. Navarro's anti-China views help lead further to a U.S. trade war against China? Russian President Vladimir Putin has just wrapped up his annual year-end news conference in Moscow. It's the 12th such media briefing Putin has conducted with Russian and international journalists, with participants reaching over 1,400 this year, a record high. Questions regarding Russia's foreign policy were the highlights, covering Russia's ties with the West, diplomatic deadlock over Ukraine, the situation in Syria, and Moscow's improving ties with Turkey. Putin called the Russian ambassador's assassination an attempt to strain Russia-Turkey relations and stressed it won't hurt improving ties between the two countries. On the much-anticipated turning point of Russia-U.S. ties under a new president from the U.S., Putin did little to hide his fondness for Donald Trump and called for constructive relations with Washington.
Reagan
would be glad to see members of his party winning everywhere. He would be happy for the newly elected president who keenly felt popular mood and worked in this direction. He went until the end, although nobody believed except us that he would win.
It's really been a busy year for Russia's foreign affairs after Moscow's 2014 annexation of Crimea and support for President Bashar Assad in Syria conflict. Russia's relations with the West are at their worst since the Cold War. Relations with Turkey also went south since the end of 2015 with the downing of a Russian military jet. But now, there are signs, some argue, of a thaw in relations with both.
Russia's intervention in the Syria conflict officially began when Russia jets started bombing rebel targets in late 2015. The landscape has been changed not only for Syria, but also for world politics. Russia claimed to have killed 35,000 rebel fighters and played a key role in the recapture of rebel-held Aleppo. But Moscow's role in the Syria conflict has widened its rift with the U.S., with both accusing each other of violating peace deals and targeting civilians. The Kremlin recently said ties with the U.S. were frozen.
As you know, almost every level of dialogue with the United States is frozen. We don't communicate with one another, or if we do so minimally.
The White House refuted these comments, but agreed that disagreement with Moscow remains. Washington has reaffirmed its commitment to maintaining sanctions on Moscow over Crimea with new financial restrictions. And they also pointed to direct involvement by the Russian government in meddling with the U.S. election. However, the incoming presidency of Donald Trump has sent a positive signal for the future of U.S.-Russia ties. Mr. Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin seem to be two peas in a pod, and they are willing to cooperate.
We would like to believe that there will be a chance to improve relations, which are important not only to both countries, but also for securing international stability and safety. During a recent phone conversation with Mr. Donald Trump, we both agreed that the current unsatisfying condition of Russia-US relations needs to be improved without any doubt.
Meanwhile, Russia's relations with Turkey have signs of improvement despite the recent assassination of the Russian ambassador in Ankara. Ties have deteriorated since a Russian military jet was shot down by Turkey in late 2015, and differences in the Syrian conflict have driven the two further apart. Following an attempted coup against him over the summer, though, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan paid his first post-coup visit to Moscow, where he met with Mr. Putin and began to fix the rift. Analysts say the assassination might even push Turkey closer to Russia.
The assassination of the ambassador is very likely to make Turkey change a lot in its attitudes on the Syrian issue.
Russia will be more dominant in its diplomacy and will ask Turkey to make more concessions to move closer to Russia.
There's no sign of an end to Russia flexing its diplomatic and military muscle anytime soon, but efforts to mend fences with neighbors and an incoming sympathetic U.S. president are slowly paying off.
And for more discussion about Russian President Vladimir Putin's annual press conference and the main points he mentioned, we're joined here by Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. In Moscow, Mr. Yuri Tavrovsky, a professor at the Russian People's Friendship University. In Boston, Mr. Vitaly Kozyrev, I hope I pronounced your name right, sir, an associate professor of political science and international studies at Endicott College. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. First of all, I want to open up the discussion by talk a little bit the latest news today. Aleppo is being claimed to be quote-unquote liberated by the Syrian government. And therefore, how much do you think this news is being reflected, Professor Tavrovsky from Russia, in the annual press conference given by the president?
Well, actually, the foreign policy issues were not very prominent during the press conference. What was most interesting and important was maybe the domestic policy and certain criticism which was sounded by some journalists, because our foreign policy is very successful. Russia is strong. Russia is respected, and both Americans and some Europeans want to mend relations with Russia. But the problem is with the economics, and it's not the sanctions. It's our, yes.
It seems that you are shying a little bit away from my question. My question is, how much is the issue of Syria and Aleppo is actually being mentioned in the press conference? How much does it reveal about the future Moscow's potential of dealing with the region? That's my question, Professor.
Actually, the Syrian situation and the Aleppo situation is not that important. It cannot influence the entire foreign policy of Russia. It cannot influence our future relations with the presidency, with Trump's presidency.
All right.
It's just an episode.
It's an episode. Do you agree with that, Mr. Kozyrev, professor from the U.S.? Of course, during the press conference, if I remember right, President Putin mentioned several things. He talked about the leaders of Turkey and Iran playing key role in terms of guarantee the liberation of the Aleppo, but at the same time, he also said, I don't want to sound immodest, but without Russia's participation, none of these could be achieved. Exactly what role do you think Russia has played? Is it right for the President Putin to claim the credit?
Yes, of course. I think that without Russia's support, military support, the Assad troops wouldn't be so successful. And I disagree with Professor Tavrovsky, saying that it is just an episode. It's an important milestone, and that might lead to political reconciliation or some sort of talks which are being planned probably in Kazakhstan in the near future. So I think that the Russian participation has been key.
At this point, Professor, you might know that Iran, Syria, Assad, and Turkey have all agreed on Astana as the venue for Syria talks from now on, the Kazakh capital, of course, that is. And Putin said the next step should be all Syria ceasefire deals. How much role do you think Russia will play vis-a-vis that of the United States? After all, this peace deal has not been negotiated down by the U.S., and there has been a change of administration in the very near future. What is likely to be the strength between the two capitals, given what Mr. Putin just said?
I believe that what Russia
Professor Kozyrev.
I believe that what Russia has been I believe what Russia has been trying is to engage many times on multiple venues in multiple occasions the United States, and there has been some effective cooperation between the militaries military of the United States and Russia in this respect. And I believe that probably Russia will continue like include and of course invite the United States as part of the whole chess game to attain this goal of settlement, political settlement in Syria.
Really? Inviting United States to be part of the chess game? Wow, that's quite an interesting way of putting it. Professor Tavrovsky, you want to respond to that? Is that possible?
Yes, but anyway, we should wait for the inauguration, because the events can take any direction. Let's wait, because President Trump is rather unpredictable.
Well, what Professor Tavrovsky mentioned to us, that is when he's being asked, what about the relations between Russia and the United States? President Putin said, well, it's hard to say. And he's saying it couldn't get worse because it's already the worst. But given what is happening now in Aleppo and Syria, can it be also an interesting starting point for Russia and the United States to work together in certain ways? We don't know how, but can it be an initiative?
Yeah, exactly. Certainly. Now, I think especially from Mr. Putin's perspective, I think it's a new president or the president-elect in United States open a new door, maybe a more possibility than especially his predecessor. I mean, this Obama administration, because so far, indeed, as we know, it looks like Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump, they do have a good feeling with each other. And also from Mr. Trump, during the campaign, he mentioned perhaps a fight against terrorism should be very, very good field for more cooperation between two countries. So I think now maybe the question in Syria is United States and Russia, they could have some more cooperation, but maybe not in the future of the Syria political solution. Certainly they will try to avoid this very, very trouble issue, and they will try to focus on the fight against terrorism.
Well, certainly the helping hand, shall we use that phrase, in terms of Syria crisis, Russia has played. It's likely, at least in the region, to increase Russia's credibility. And therefore, Mr. Kazyrev, when Russia and the United States both are talking about nuclear weapons, which was mentioned by your president-elect, Mr. Trump, to increase the U.S. nuclear weapon capabilities, President Putin said, we're not there to compete. We don't have the money. We don't have the resources. We're not going to waste it on something we can't do better than the U.S. What do you think of this issue? Is it likely to be a future point of conflict between the two countries?
I believe that we have seen some movement and improvement and some upgrade of nuclear potentials in both countries, and the United States has been announcing some new programs to develop this new generation of nuclear potential, and the Russian government, the Russian military has been very active within the last probably 5-6 years to do the same. I don't see here a deviation from the original previous standpoint where the two biggest nuclear powers were actually trying to kind of find some sort of equilibrium between themselves. And President Putin actually mentioned during his press conference, said that we are operating within the agreements and the treaties which we have signed with the United States. So we're not going beyond. He has been critical of U.S. withdrawal from the anti-ballistic missile treaty by the Bush administration, and this has been, and he has a very interesting elaboration on this, saying that each side is doing its own game. It's playing its own game. It's kind of quiet, tacit consensus in terms of the American side is improving its defense capabilities, and the Russian side is improving some sort of asymmetric response to this. I don't see a big shift here.
Okay, it is extremely interesting, Professor Tavrovsky, that the president-elect Donald Trump in the U.S. talked specifically on his Twitter about U.S. nuclear capabilities. And that is such a shift from the previous policies of the Obama administration. Of course, at this moment, Professor Tavrovsky, you know better than I do that, well, whether he talked about on Twitter is likely to be translated into real policy is another thing. But still, you do see some interesting points of possible conflicts between Russia and the United States. What would you say, Professor?
You know, I don't see any possibility of conflict between Russia and the United States in this sphere. I think that actually we have lived through the worst period, and now something should improve. As for Putin, I think he is in a very strong position. His nuclear umbrella is very efficient. He has very efficient armed forces. He enjoys support of his nation. So he can wait for some deeds from the President-elect Trump. The words by Trump are very promising. Yes, they are very interesting and promising. But let's wait for the deeds.
It's very interesting.
Some initiatives, you know.
Some initiatives.
Something positive should be put on the table.
We will have to wait until January the 20th or even a little bit later for Mr. Trump to put out his own policies over there. Probably another big annual press conference, I guess. But Mr. Cui, we talked earlier about Russia's relations with the United States and also its power in the Middle East with Syria as an issue. But what about its relations with Europe? President Putin seems to be speaking much harsher when it comes to Russia's ties now with the EU. What would you say?
Yes, now I think for Europe, it will take maybe some more time to wait for the policy from President Trump after he take office next year. Because so far, during his campaign, he do have some, words or some, commitment about Europe. But it looks like, because now, to much degree, the future or direction, the destiny of Europe depends on how is the relations between U.S. and Russia, especially in Ukraine issue, Syria issue. Also, both of them are very, very big concerns for Europe. One of them for the kind of traditional threat.
Right.
Another one is from the refugee or migration issue. So I think now for Europe, they have to wait for some time. But now the question for Europe and the U.S. is, how could they try to continue this traditional transatlantic relations?
I guess its relations with Russia also depends on how its relations be moving with the United States.
Very complicated balance.
There we go, over there, a lot of balance over there. Professor Kozyrev, of course, when you listen to President Putin this time during his press conference, he talked about Ukraine, and he used one phrase. He said, sooner or later, the diplomatic relations will have to be resumed between Russia and Ukraine. That's an interesting way of putting it. What kind of message should we really get from this?
The message is very clear. Putin has always been consistent in terms of naming the Ukrainian people as a kind of very close to the Russian people and the cultures, civilization-wise. The two peoples have had a very solid history, and he, since the outbreak of the Ukraine crisis in the early 2014, the Russian government and the Russian side actually has never accused of the Ukrainian people of some, something or anything which might really contribute to the split between the Ukrainian and the Russian peoples. So what has been the target is the Ukrainian government, the new government, which is so much reluctant to cooperate with Russia or to even look at Russia as a potential partner. So for the Putin administration and Putin himself, it is not normal. It is not normal. It is temporary. He believes that this is temporarily, kind of deviation from the normal state of affairs, and which is probably which reflects the reality.
Okay, if that is a continuity of what Mr. Putin's words, but what about the choices that the European Union or the European countries could have in terms of its relations with Russia? Professor Tavrovsky, at this moment, sanctions, punishments still coming from European capitals against Russia because of Ukraine, because of other issues. And therefore, how do you think, from the Russian perspective, the EU likely to move, given a lot of internal problems they also have among themselves, and also troubles coming from migrants and also terrorism? So with the unpredictability of the US administration, how are the European capitals likely to move toward Moscow, and Moscow react to that?
Well, I think a lot depends on the politics of President Trump, because the European Union is not actually an independent entity. It hears what leaders from Washington tell them to do. So it is also wiser to wait until Trump's administration will start to give directions to Europe. And as for Ukraine, it's also, Ukrainian government is not independent, and it's acting against its national interests. And the national interests of Ukrainian nation is in good relations with Russia. And you know what's interesting? For the couple of weeks, there are crowds coming to the railway stations in Ukrainian cities, and they start to sing Russian songs.
All right.
And Russians also reciprocated. There were several stations and there were several crowds singing Ukrainian songs.
Certainly,
so,
you see.
We really want to have good relations.
Well, we'll see whether the singing of a few crowds are necessarily going to transform into a national movement. But before we go, very brief question for all of you, but very important as well. Today, during the press conference, there were also journalists accusing President Putin of having big mouth, short legs, meaning promising a lot, not necessarily carrying out, particularly when it comes to economy and the internal issues. Professor Kozyrev, very briefly from you, how much do you think President Putin will be able to translate his promise, economy getting better by the end of next year, really into reality? Very briefly.
It's hard. It's hard due to lack of probably the kind of power vertical and the mix of kind of state-owned and private corporations, and it's hard to get to a consensus. So I believe that in terms of developing this program of reform and implementing this program of reform is pretty hard to do. So the many Russian businesses and hoping that there will be probably some sort of improvement in terms of engaging with a relationship with China in the future.
We'll see whether that's really a solution. Mr. Cui, final words from you.
Yes, domestic economy always a weak point for Mr. Putin. But maybe now the good news for him is now the oil price getting rise.
All right, we'll see whether that's going to be a big rescue for the Russian economy. Thank you so much, the three of you, gentlemen, for being with us. Cui Hongjian, Yuri Tavrovsky, and Vitaly Kozyrev. Really appreciate it. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. Mr. Trump makes a bold choice in appointing a known China critic to lead a new trade commission. Not a good sign, many say, for China-U.S. relations. It's raising concerns over trade ties between the world's two biggest economies. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has picked Peter Navarro, a strong critic of China's trade practices, to head the newly created National Trade Council at the White House. China extends an olive branch to the incoming president, urging him to choose cooperation when it comes to China-U.S. relations. CCTV correspondent Jessica Stone has more from Washington.
Peter Navarro is an economist, but perhaps even more important, he has been advising Donald Trump on China and trade policy throughout the entire presidential campaign. Navarro will be leading a new department called the White House National Trade Council. The council's purpose is to put American manufacturing and American workers first. Trump says he read one of Navarro's books on global trade and was impressed. Quote, he has presciently documented the harms inflicted by globalism on American workers and laid out a path forward to restore our middle class. He will fulfill an essential role in my administration as a trade advisor. And Navarro has essentially accused Beijing of waging economic war against the United States. He also produced a 90-minute documentary called Death by China, which documents the decline of U.S. manufacturing. There is no mention in this documentary of China's investment in the U.S. economy. For example, a Rhodium Group study shows there are more than 100,000 Americans now employed through Chinese companies. So far, Beijing is taking a wait-and-see approach to Trump's changes in U.S. posture towards China, but we've also seen the foreign ministry and other Chinese diplomats remind the incoming U.S. president about the importance of upholding the one China policy. Here's the foreign ministry on Thursday after Trump named Navarro to this post.
We hope the U.S. side can work with China to maintain a healthy and stable development of China-U.S. relations, including trade relations, which serve the interests of both countries and are conducive to world development and prosperity.
Trump has used his appointments as well as his interviews in the media to take a tougher stance on relations with China. In fact, there is no acknowledgement of China's role in addressing climate change and nuclear nonproliferation. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently said that despite the instability and uncertainty of international relations in 2016, China's diplomacy had become more confident and mature.
We have put forward in a timely fashion China's own plan to enhance global management to steer the international political and economic system in a more just and rational direction.
Unlike some of President-elect Donald Trump's other selections for roles in his White House, Navarro's position will not be subject to congressional approval. He will be a member of the White House staff. Jessica Stone, Washington.
Well, for the potential of China-U.S. trade ties, we are joined in the Beijing studio Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. In Hong Kong, Edward Xie, the CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company. In Washington, D.C., Max Wolf, an economic professor from the New School University in New York. Welcome to the Three of You, gentlemen. I want to start by asking Professor Wolf, as an economist yourself, what do you make of the appointment of Mr. Navarro, who has been writing a book about death to China, something like that, even though he argued he didn't give the title to the book, but rather the publisher, in order to sell more books? What do you make of his coming into this very key position?
So great to be here. Look, I think this is a cause for some concern. Throughout the history of globalization and international trade, we've seen efforts by mostly elites, when they come under pressure from general publics, to blame foreigners for the ills that afflict their society. It is no doubt true that there are many in the United States that are economically hurting. It is equally no doubt true that their problems do not stem from China and do not stem from trade, but that one thing that has happened is, as the fortunes of some middle-class Americans have declined, that has been historically coincident with the rise of China. However, correlation does not make causation, and we will all be worse off. All of us will be poorer, including those self-same people that Trump appeals to, or Mr. Navarro with that rhetoric, if we give in to the rhetoric and imagine it's anything other than a short way to feel better. So as an economist, I'm concerned. As a citizen, I'm concerned. I do think there's plenty of opportunity to avoid the worst case scenario, but this is reasonable cause for concern as a citizen or an economist, in my opinion.
Mr. Xie, can punishing China, quote unquote, be able to buy U.S. time in order to move its economy forward?
Well, building an economy or rebuilding economy for a big country like the USA is not a straightforward process. Things just don't happen overnight. By focusing on China and try to so-called penalize China, in my view, is not going to provide a right-away solution for the U.S. The U.S. need to really figure out, what is the right strategy for itself if they want to create jobs and want to, regain the manufacturing competitiveness. But I have to think that the solution is not only on focusing on China. There's a lot more that they need to do.
Well, at this point, currency manipulator, 45% tax on Chinese imports. Those are the rhetoric coming from President-elect Mr. Trump. Some take it very seriously. Others say he would not be able to realize it because there's still a congressional approval. But obviously, he's trying to make those come true to a certain extent. Professor Liu, therefore, I want to ask you, what would that mean for the Chinese economy. Are we going to see a win-lose situation between the U.S. and China, or a lose-lose situation once a trade war starts?
Well, actually, you talked about the Peter Narrow, that, I see the two side of irony within him. Number one is that he started this book by viewing the fact that many of the Chinese graduates in the United States are really taking over the jobs from the U.S. But he ignored the fact that so many Chinese students have been paying the tuition to support the education industry export of the United States. So number two is that I seldom read any economist who is really viewing trade as a zero-sum game. So therefore,
well,
whether this is going to be
translated, you now can read his book.
Whether this can be really translated into the White House policy, I really feel very doubtful. But the fact, by setting up the National Trade Council, versus the, I do not know how to divide the work with now the existing Foreign Trade Council, which is there for 100 years. So the, that can only, this type of seemingly tougher policy can only anger China and anger those proponents for the free trade,
Professor
but that
Liu,
doesn't really serve the fact to realize what is so claimed as is the policy goal of the United States.
Professor Liu, you did raise an interesting point, that is the bureaucratic possible conflict within the American government about what to do and what not to do. Will they be able to scream that out? Professor Wolf, I don't want you to predict the policies of the shall I say, Trump administration, because it could be a little bit dramatic, but politically speaking, will these bureaucracies, newly created, traditionally existing, really be able to work together well, or there's likely to be more chaotic situation before anything could ever happen?
Yeah, so I think we're already seeing that there's going to be a lot of different groups, both traditional and then newly made up groups working at cross purposes, possibly having their own leaks or press conferences, sometimes contradicting each other. And what I think we're going to get is a real sort of tangle of different policies, perspectives. But I would say one other thing, which I think we'd probably all agree on, but I think is important, which is rhetoric has consequences even when it does not pass into policy. And nasty rhetoric that might appeal domestically has international reverberations, and you cannot unsay the things you said, even when you realize later perhaps they were said in error.
Very interesting. Professor Wolf, I know you wouldn't be able to notice, but behind you there was another cable news network as program being shown on one of the TVs, and it certainly told a story in a very different perspective called China Makes Trade War with the United States. That's, of course, it's a very different perspective. Like you said, the rhetorics as we see. Let me come to you, Mr. Xie. What about that? Eventually, when countries compete economically, what do they compete about? Do they compete about rhetorics and the votes they could have from their constituencies for their next election? Do they compete about the best and most favorable policies toward the businesses and companies? Do they compete about international credibility of leading the next round of innovation and new industrialization? What do they compete about fundamentally, Professor? Mr. Xie.
Well, first of all, the perceived priority, is a function of the political system of the countries, right? So, in a country like the U.S. where, presidential election happens every 4 years, it motivates the candidates to say things that, whether they truly mean it or not, as long as it sort of can get votes, that's the critical thing. And I think that's, perhaps some of the issues that we're facing here. But if we're talking about the real competition across different countries, it's got to be based on the relative competitive advantages of the countries. Which country has what competitive advantage, and why are they doing better at certain things than some other countries, and what they can improve their competitive advantages on. And usually, at least based on our experience looking at different countries over the years, is usually based on innovation. It's based on openness, based on collaboration, and so on and so forth. That's going to be the more important elements of competitiveness rather than political rhetoric.
Right. Professor Liu, therefore, I want to throw in an interesting example. A story happened here in China. That is Mr. Cao Dewang, who is the CEO and founder of one of the most well-known Chinese car glass providers. He manufactures car glass to provide glasses for, GM and Ford, many of the most well-known cars. He talked about he probably wants to invest more in the United States because the tax could be too much here in China. That created a huge debate here in China about with incoming US President Mr. Trump talking about 15% tax only corporate. And China now at this point probably even more than 35 to 40%. People are saying, where is China's competitive edge? Plus labor. Some suggest it's already getting the same price as the Eastern European countries and Russia. And meanwhile, there is other elements, for example, inventories, the prices of electricity, water, and things like that, transportation. Will China be competitive when it comes to real issues?
Well, competition comes from many dimensions, and the government attitude towards business is really a wild card. And so whether they have the sort of the certainty that is able to shape the business environment is one. I think China is also moving very spearheadedly into that direction, and the success for attracting foreign investment as the largest recipient of FDI shows the fact. And the other is that whether you have the right type of industrial cluster. So right now we can see that along the coast region of China, you see so many industrial clusters. You want to build a Boeing factory, you want to build a scooter assembly plant. So within 3 days, you almost can find all the suppliers, so that the infrastructure and the clusters are there. So the demographic dividend has been really winning, which is a fact. But there has been continuous supply of many other preferential policies that the United States cannot really compete. And plus, more importantly, it is really the closeness to the market, to the rising market of China and with its neighboring countries.
But what about the market is elsewhere? That's an interesting question. At this point, we do want to take a look at the tax because corporate tax has been so much debated during the upcoming, leading up to the U.S. presidential election. And in this regard, China is among the highest taxed country in the world. According to the World Bank, of course, this number is coming from the World Bank, the total tax rate for businesses in China was 68% in the year 2016. In contrast, the total tax rate for U.S. was only, at this point, 44%. The labor tax rate in China was as high as 48.8%, well above the world average of 16.3%. That, of course, is still the number coming from the World Bank. It is arguable, but still these numbers could be of some reference. Mr. Xie, when you hear corporate tax could be as low as 15% in the United States, as Mr. Trump promised the businesses, and also when you see China also try to slash back its taxes for the corporates and companies, at the same time trying to streamline the excessive administrative procedures. After all, 1/3 of them has already been gotten rid of over the past 2 years. What exactly do you think, Mr. Xie, the two countries are really competing about?
Well, as I mentioned, the basis of competition is actually about competitive advantages, and competitive advantages is partially based on the cost structure and how much it takes, the cost to do business across different countries. In this case, it's very clear that, first of all, I agree with you, whether or not the data from the World Bank report on Chinese tax is actually accurate is debatable. But nonetheless, it is also our experience when we work with different clients, corporate clients in China, that indeed the feelings about the tax burden, as well as just the cost of doing business in China is very high. And therefore, it is critical for the Chinese government, at least in our view, to really look at the tax structure to see if there's any room to reduce it so that China can gain or regain some competitive advantages on the cost structure of doing business.
I see. Before we go, only 30 seconds left for you, Professor Wolf. Can this be, all these rhetorics, become something with a silver lining for the two governments to really streamline their policies and encourage real manufacturing, real businesses, and economy to grow?
Yeah, we do have an opportunity to grow up in our trade rhetoric here and face some basic facts which have been absent to debate. And those would be the United States manufacturing output is now quite high and it's pretty competitive. We don't compete directly with China. Technology and a different division between profit and wages are what people are angry about, probably not trade, and we'll all be better off if we get to a debate centered on those facts.
All right, Max Wolf, Edward Xie, Liu Baozheng, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. It is an important debate. I'm sure that debate will continue. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see our program, visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next week for more insights from across China and around the world. The weekend up is the Christmas, so have a great one, everyone.